It's my pleasure to be part of the series of bringing the teaching of Rav Halivni to a greater public awareness. There's a profound difference between a scholar who brings information to light and a darshan, a preacher who provides inspiration to those who listen. Today, I would like to dwell not so much on the scholarship of Rav Halivni, but on his ability to be a superb preacher. In his book, Divrei Halev, that my colleague and friend, Rabbi Ronald Price, helped bring to publication, in Parshat Tetzaveh, he talks about the real meaning of humility. Humility is evidenced by Moshe Rabbeinu, and the standard explanation of why Moses' name is not included at all in Parshat Tetzaveh. In fact, it's the only Torah reading portion since we are introduced to Moshe Rabbeinu in Shmot. It's the only portion in which he is omitted. And the standard explanation is that Moses withdrew himself from mention as a manifestation of his humility. He stepped back in order to allow his brother Aaron to gain prominence. And in fact, that's what we see. Moses' name is not mentioned at all. Aaron and his sons are mentioned no less than 22 times. But the key insight that Rav Halivni offers is not just to notice what everyone else did, but to make an important distinction. He tells us that humility is not identical to low self-esteem. And the example that he cites is from the Babylonian Talmud in the tractate Sotah, in which Rav Yosef disputed the claim that since the death of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, humility disappeared from the world. He was the last person who manifested humility. And in making his case, Rav Yosef points to himself. Rav Yosef says, I am the example that humility has not disappeared. And of course, this sounds self-contradictory. How can you accept an award for humility, and how can you award yourself the title of humble? Seems hardly a humble thing to say, but it is reflective of high self-esteem. Now, Rav Halivni here is hinting at a truth that false humility is also a character flaw. And Rav Yosef refused to deny his importance, his knowledge, his scholarship. He had to admit that he was indeed worthy of adulation. And so, instead of denying it, he accepted it. And I am reminded of an actual story that speaks of an example from politics. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter appointed Philip Klutznick to be Secretary of Commerce. Now, if you don't know the name Philip Klutznick, I'm sorry, but I'll tell you briefly about him. He was a true American who represented the United States at the United Nations and in other public fora. He was even given the title of ambassador. He was responsible for many things in the public sector after his success in business. He served as president of B'nai B'rith and president of the World Jewish Congress. And he was instrumental in housing development in the United States. And it's for that reason that he was appointed, successful in business and in the public arena, by the president to serve in his cabinet. Now, at the ceremony when Klutznick was introduced, that took place in the Rose Garden of the White House, President Jimmy Carter was effusive in his praise of Klutznick, listing all his many and varied accomplishments. And Klutznick was listening. When it was time for him to respond, he came forward and at the microphone he said, "The president has listed all of my accomplishments. Who am I," he said, "to dispute the president of the United States?" So in a way, he had to accept it as true, even though it made him look as if he was certainly less than humble. But instead, he deflected in a way that didn't deny the truth of what was said about him, but didn't put him forward as boasting. Now, here I have to add a biographical addendum. We know that Rav Halivni was a great scholar and could have boasted about his scholarship, but that was not his style. He was my house guest on more than one occasion, and my wife, who had entertained regularly, since I was the rabbi of a very large and impressive congregation, we often had guest speakers, and many of them stayed with us. She reminds me that Rav Halivni was always her favorite guest. And the reason for it is he was the only house guest we ever had who never talked about himself and instead asked my wife, not me, but asked my wife what she did and to tell him about her experiences. In other words, Rav Halivni was someone who took a sincere interest in others, even those who were not comparable to him in scholarship, and he ingratiated himself to many because of the way he behaved. Of course, the ultimate lesson that Rav Halivni is pointing us towards is that humility is a grace and a virtue that all Jews should have, and it's one that characterized him perhaps more than any other. Tehi Zichrono Baruch, may his memory always be a source of blessing and inspiration.